A crisis is when you are overwhelmed by negative events or situations or circumstances, causing you to feel helpless or hopeless. It is where the events that are overwhelming you are beating at your well-being. Whether it's a health crisis, family crisis, monetary crisis, mental crisis, it's beating you down. And there isn't a solution clearly in sight. Where do you go when your life is in a crisis? In other words, none of the places you look to resolve it can help you. That's our situation in John 11. Now let's set the stage. Lazarus is sick. And we know from the story, he's sick unto death because it would only be a few days later he would die. So he's not just sick, he's seriously sick. And whatever medical help there was insufficient to resolve the problem of his medical crisis. So what Martha and Mary did, the sisters of Lazarus, is they went to Jesus. They sent word to Jesus. You and I would call that today, they prayed. They sent word to Jesus. Jesus, our family member has a crisis. It's a life and death crisis. And we're crying to you to resolve the crisis. Now I want you to observe something. We're told in verse 3 some of their prayer requests. The one whom you love is sick. We're told in verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So evidently spiritual people get sick. They had a love relationship. Jesus loved them and they loved Jesus, yet he still got sick. So don't ever let anybody tell you just because you have trouble means God is far away or you're not in fellowship with God. They're in fellowship with God, but he got sick. So they prayed. They sent word to Jesus. The one whom you love is sick, and it's serious. Jesus sends back a word. This sickness, verse 4, is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified. That's pregnant with theology. He says, first of all, I've got good news for you. Bad as it is, this sickness is not unto death, but God wants to get something out of it. So let me give you and me and us theology and whatever the sickness is you're facing, the scenario or the crisis that you will face. God will allow things in our lives that are not preferential to us, but are glorifying to him. This sickness is not unto death, but it is for the glory of God. So one of the questions you must ask and answer in prayer when you're in, when I'm in, when we're in a crisis, is you must answer the question, God, what glory do you want from my crisis? But I got a problem. My problem is verse 6. When he heard he was sick, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Come on, Jesus. I just told you my brother is sick, and you even know it's not unto death, because you told me he's not going to die, and you're not going to hurry up? Has God ever delayed on you when you're in a crisis? You need him right now, and he's hanging back for 2 more days. He's not moving like you need him to move, want him to move, feeling he should move, cry for him to move. He's not moving. He stays 2 days, but it gets worse. Where Jesus was and where Martha and Mary were, 2 miles apart. So not only does he delay, he delays and he close. Now I can understand if you cross town and he sent you the Son of God, I probably won't even understand that. But at least in your humanity, if you're on the other side of town, you got to take a donkey. I got you. It's going to take a minute to get. But you're down the street, Jesus. If you don't want to walk, get a ride. But you can get a horse, a donkey, a carriage, or get your 12 disciples to carry you. You 2 miles away. You close, and you don't come, and you delay 2 days after I prayed, because they've already talked to Jesus. They've already put up their prayer request. The story gets more interesting. After 2 days, Jesus tells his disciples, let's go to Judea. Let's go, guys. Then he says something else, a new term for Christians. Verse 11, he said to them, our friend, because remember, Lazarus is close to Jesus, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awake him out of his sleep. Verse 13, now Jesus had spoken of his death, but he doesn't say he died. He said he's sleeping. This is a different terminology. This is new. The word sleep is only used of Christians in the Bible. It's not used of the general public, only used of Christians. So Christians sleep. Whether God brings you back in this life or takes you to the next life, you're only transferring consciousness. You're not losing existence. And you're transferring that consciousness in the will of God. This is new terminology. But here's what messes me up. Can I tell you what messes me up? One thing messed me up, be 2 days. Come on, Jesus, hurry up. Second thing messed me up is 2 miles. You close. But the next thing that messes me up in verse 15 is, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there. Come on now. How you going to be happy about it? There are 2 sisters, Martha and Mary. And both sisters have the same question, but they approach the question differently. Martha raises the question in verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Verse 32. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Those are the exact same words. Both sisters, which means they have discussed Jesus. Wait a minute, let me make sure I'm being relevant. Anybody here ever been felt God has let you down? God, where were you, God? Don't you care? How could you be this close, stay 2 days longer, and be glad? Doesn't make sense. She lets her emotions appropriately, respectfully, but clearly be enunciated in her prayer, because she's talking to Jesus, just like you and I. She has him physically, we have him spiritually, but it's a conversation with Jesus in the midst of a crisis. But she does something else, and I don't want you to miss this. Remember, I'm trying to walk you through this passage theologically, because after she expresses her disappointment, she goes on to say in verse 22, Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give to you. Whoa, I don't want you to miss this. Jesus, verse 21, I'm hurting because I needed you and you didn't come. But, however, in spite of my pain, I know my beliefs. And if you call on the Father now, as bad as this situation is, he will still honor your request. So she marries, watch this, she marries her emotions with her theology. Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. She says to Jesus, yeah, I know. I learned theology, went to eschatology class. On the last day, he gonna rise. I know about that. Then Jesus hits her with another theology. Can I talk some theology here? Because I want to ground you. I want to root you. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. Doctrine is critical, but doctrine is always to lead to a person. If all you get is doctrine, you may be heavy in the head with information, but light on the experience. You may know about the resurrection, but never experience one. Because he says the resurrection that's doctrinal is tied to a person. So here's the point. The written word must always lead you to the living word. You need the doctrine to know what to believe. You need the person to make it experiential in your belief. I'm the resurrection. He says at the end of verse 26, do you believe this? This is going to be critical. This will change your life. Do you believe this? She says, yes, I believe. You are the Christ, the Son of God who comes into the world. Now, it's Mary's turn. Mary not coming to Jesus. She's too disappointed. And let's tell the truth. Sometimes you're so disappointed with Jesus, you don't want to talk to him. Can anybody raise your hand and tell you don't want to pray no more? Okay? Because he's not moving. He came too late. Should have been here yesterday. Okay? That kind of thing. So she don't want to talk to you. So Jesus calls her. He says, Mary, come on, come talk to me now. He bids us come. She gets up quickly because he invited her. And then she tells him, verse 32, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Now, in verse 33, everybody's crying. We've got a weeping time because when you're in pain, you're going to cry if it hurts bad enough. So now, Jesus raises the question, where have you laid him? Where is he buried? So they come to take Jesus to where he was buried, and he's stirred up, verse 38 says. He's deeply moved within. He's moved at the sin and the pain that the world offers that creates sickness in the first place. Without sin, there would be no sickness. Without, not personal sin necessarily, but atmospheric sin. The germs, the viruses, the bacterias that infiltrate our body, the toxins, all of that is the environmental repercussions of sin. And he was stirred up at what the crisis that they were in and the reasons for it. And so he says, stay with me here, verse 39, Jesus looks at Martha and says, Martha, move the stone. Martha's response, Martha said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. You remember that delay? By this time, he stinks. Jesus said, move the stone. She says, let me give you a lesson in mortuary science. He's been dead 4 days. Rigor mortis has set in, which means the cells have collapsed. When rigor mortis sets in and the cells collapse, it releases a green substance. When this green substance is released because rigor mortis has set in, because the cells has collapsed, that produces a stench because of the decay. He says to her, did not I say to you? He said, remove the stone. And what did he tell her? He said, did not I say to you, if you believe, you would see the glory of God? In other words, here it is, faith must always precede sight. Once you put sight in front of faith, because you were from Missouri, once you put sight in front of faith, you've negated faith. Faith is based on what you do not see. If you got to see it first, you won't see it. No. And how would she demonstrate faith? Not by a feeling, but by removing the stone. Because faith is not a feeling, it's an action. As you've heard me say many times, faith is acting like God is telling the truth. It is acting like it is so even when it's not so, in order that it might be so, simply because God said so. So you move in faith even when you don't feel it. Sometimes you're going to feel faithish. Got faith all over you. You're just feeling it. Sometimes you won't ever feel faithish, but you can know you're operating in faith because you're moving the stone. So some of us have situations that have not changed because we still having conversations and have not touched the stone. The thing that God told us to do that we refuse to do, which keeps the stone there, which means there's no faith no matter how much church you have. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. There's theology there. You're praying through a crisis. You're talking to God. But here's what you want. You want Jesus talking to God for you. See, you got to talk to him first. But what you want is Jesus to ditto the request. Then, not until it was an act of faith, Jesus says to his Father, I thank you that you have heard me. He didn't say, I thank you that you hear me. I thank you that you heard me, which means we've already discussed this crisis that Lazarus is in. When they prayed the first time at the beginning of chapter 11, you and our Father had a conversation. Martha and Mary, they have a sick brother. They want us to do something. Daddy, Martha and Mary just came to me and they had a conversation. They want us to do something about their brother Lazarus. So let's talk about how we're going to handle this. Well, son, you know what? We can actually use this crisis as an opportunity for me to have greater glory. So son, so here's what we're going to do. As soon as they demonstrate faith, then we're going to let this thing. Roll out. Because did you know when you first talked to God a year ago about that problem, he and the son have already discussed that? They've already discussed that. But the son is not praying for the implementation until faith has been demonstrated.